Advanced Heroquest, Tobaro's Shame. The Fate and Grudges of Sven Hammerhelm. Part 2. A 100 years before the events of Tobaro's Bane, the dwarf, Sven Hammerhelm, lived in the dwarf hold of Karak Hirn. This large hold lay within the Black Mountains, and was an important trading centre for wares from the city-states of Tylea, the southern cities of the Empire, and the ancient holds of the World's Edge Mountains. A bastion of order in the wild mountaintops, otherwise infested with ice giants above, goblins and their ilk below, and beasts and their kin between. Sven Hammerhelm awoke to his old ceiling. The comforting roar of the furnace prickled the air, and the smell of smelting metal wafted through his chamber. In the adjoining forge, the familiar clank, clank, clank of his father's hammer rang out upon their anvil. He was late. He had overslept again, and he was soon going to regret it. His father would not quickly forgive his tardiness. His father, Dorin, a member of the clan of Morgrim, more commonly known as the Guild of Runesmiths, was busy making their final preparations for their next expedition. Sven was supposed to be helping. They were to travel northeast to the abandoned hold of Karak Hirn, now called Cragmere by most, which overlooked Varndraz, the Black Water Lake. The reason was the same as usual. This was another of the rumoured resting places of the lost anvil of the ancient runesmith, old Dorin Hammerhelm, a distant ancestor of Sven's. Sven's father's obsession had taken them to many potential locations of the lost anvil, and, in Sven's many long years as an apprentice of the guild, he had travelled far and wide through the ruins of the old dwarf empire. Their next journey would first take them up along the Black Mountains, past the rocky streams that feed the Upper Reich, and then under Blackfire Pass, to where the Black Mountains met those of the World's Edge. It was here, in this cursed place, that the ruins of Karak Hirn lay. As usual, they would need to travel overland for the first leg of their journey, as Karak Hirn was not connected to the Ungdrin. Many dwarves would balk at the idea of travelling overground for such a prolonged period of time, but Sven had grown to love it. His father, too, gave it scant thought. It was simply a necessity, and in these times, travelling the dwarf underway was likely as dangerous as travelling above ground. However, unusually for the pair, they would actually be heading back underground for a portion of their journey. The old prospector, Nori Grumman, knew of an old hidden upper entrance to the underway that led directly into Karak Hirn. It apparently lay near the wellsprings that fed the river Sol, and the old miner was willing to lead them there. Sven and his father set off 2 days later. They were accompanied by a pair of grudge ponies that bore all of the necessary equipment they would need. The prospector, Grumman himself, led the runesmith and Sven, with 4 of his miners acting as bodyguards. Sven and his father lived on the eastern face of the dwarf hold, the portion that was actually built on the mountainside. The runesmith's chambers were in the east tower, whose uppermost portion was even exposed to the sky above. The dawn light had awoken Sven in good time that morning, and, for once, he had managed to avoid his father's anger. The group left by the eastern gate, the gate that led directly onto the overground Tarian Road. As they left, the Horn of Hirn sounded behind them. It was a windy day, and the mountain breezes blew through the cavern at the heart of the mountaintop, causing the phenomenon to blare out across the vale. It was the last time that Sven heard the sound. The party followed the road until they got close to the lake known as Edorad Water. Here, the boats that Sven's father had requested awaited them. From Edorad Water, the party rode down the Hornberg River as it cut through the vale until they reached where the river met the Hirn Road and the small fur town of Koppenleben. Here, they intended to hire a dwarf guide to take them through the mountains up to the area where the secret gate to the underway to Karak Hirn was located. At that point, Grudges intended to take over. However, as they alighted their boats, they saw that the stockade surrounding the town was being besieged. Part of it was on fire, and a number of houses on the outskirts had already burnt down. The aggressors were a warband of beastmen that were running amok. Some were feasting on the fallen, friend and foe alike, whilst others attempted to clamber up the stockade, protecting the terrified villagers. Stood at the centre of the pack was no Bray Shaman nor Beast Lord, though. Rather, it was a champion of chaos. The flayed skin and fur of a beastman adorning his helm and armour. On one arm, he bore a large shield, upon which a fearsome visage had been crudely painted. He held a burning torch in the other. Sven Hammerhelm wasted no breath nor effort on words. What was to be done was obvious, and the 7 dwarves charged at the beastmen. Sven immediately found himself beset by 3 of the Gors. The nearest attacked, but fumbled, allowing Sven to smash its head with his hammer whilst fending off the attacks of the other 2 with his shield. He then shield barged one off its cloven feet as he caved in the skull of the second beastman, before bringing his hammer once more to crash down on the prone mutant. However, as he looked about him in triumph, he saw that his fellows had fared far worse. One of the miners was being pulled apart by 4 beastmen as a 5th cut open his belly to feast on his innards, and another dwarf lay still on the floor, his severed head the subject of a tussle between 2 Gors. Grudges and the other 2 miners were attempting to fight their way towards Sven's father, who was fighting the Chaos Champion, but they were surrounded by the bulk of the warband, who were forcing them back towards a burning house. Sven ran towards the fighting, but before he could reach the beleaguered dwarves, the fire-racked house in front of which they were fighting suddenly collapsed. Grudges, the 2 dwarf miners, and the majority of the beastmen were engulfed in burning timber, falling masonry, and red-hot stone. Sven was too late. The surviving beastman scampered off into the forest, leaving only his father and the Chaos Knight still fighting. His father fought as always, in grim determination and in silence, in stark contrast to his opponent. As Sven neared, he caught part of the conversation.
Hammerhelm, isn't it? I recognize you from the battle at Winter's Teeth Pass. You fought well, although not well enough to prevent my family and I from being dragged off into the forest by the beastmen. In recompense, I think I'll take that fine hammer you wield, Master Runesmith. It'll make an excellent weapon for someone of my caliber. I do look forward to prizing it from your dead fingers.
In response, Sven's father grunted and brought his Gromril weapon, hammering against the chaotic rune shield once more, knocking the champion of chaos back. At this, the dwarf's opponent bellowed an unnatural roar into the air. And then all was silent for a moment, before an answer came from the nearby woods.
And now, you die.
Out of the nearby copse of trees strode out a gigantic gorgon. Thick, bloody drool hanging from the maw of the ox-headed monstrosity. In its forearms, it was clutching a broken tree trunk. Upon seeing the runesmith, it bellowed once more and shook its horned head. It immediately lumbered towards Sven's father. Sven ran as fast as his little legs would allow, but the Chaos Champion spotted him and ran to intercept.
Ha! Oh, no you don't, little beardling.
The Chaos Champion then hurled his torch, drew his sword, and slashed at the dwarf.
I declare I see a resemblance. Are you perhaps another Hammerhelm? How fortunate the runesmith is to have family.
Sven grunted as he fended off the sword stroke.
I'm sorry you must witness the death of your father. If it's any consolation, you'll soon follow.
At his words, Sven cast his eyes towards his father, only to see the limp, blood-stained runesmith being picked up by the gorgon and devoured whole, with only his hammer escaping the hungry maw as it fell to the earth. Father, no! Krongtharg laughed as he thrust his blade into Sven, piercing his shoulder and running him through.
Which hurts more, little beardling? The wound or the loss?
Sven grit his teeth and smashed his own hammer into the chaos blade that pierced his body, snapping it in two. And Krongtharg roared in anger. Sven did not waste the moment, though, and brought his hammer up to swipe the champion of chaos across his helm, sending him spinning away to the ground. Sven now suddenly became aware of the frantic bellowing of the gorgon. It was thrashing about in a frenzy, clutching at its throat in frustration and anger. It was choking to death on the armored body of his father, but was too stupid to realize it. However, it was still able to spy the young Sven and unsteadily lumbered towards him. Much as it galled him, Sven had no choice. He ran, the piece of broken blade embedded in him, slicing flesh anew as he did so. The way to the village was cut off from Sven by the gorgon, and so he fled in the opposite direction towards the toll house by the ford that joined the Hornberg to the river Aulen. The beast followed, still gagging on the body caught in its gullet as it went. Behind, Sven caught sight of the champion of chaos, picking up his father's hammer. Ahead of Sven appeared a group of 4 village guardsmen. They had been hiding out by the toll house whilst the village burned. They were waving their hands to try and shoo away the dwarf, but it was too late. The gorgon had spotted the 4 men. It hurled the tree trunk that it had been carrying at Sven as it stooped to grab the 4 cowardly guards, one in each hand. The tree trunk missed the dwarf, and crashed just behind Sven as he crossed the ford, landing with a crunch and a splash. One of its branches cracked and snapped off, striking Sven in the back and becoming stuck on the chaos blade that was still protruding from the dwarf's torso. The momentum and inertia of the wood sent him tumbling into the deep water rapids just downstream of the crossing, and the current quickly dragged him off downriver as he struggled and cursed. As the river heaved the log Sven was pinned to away, he finally saw the Gorgon collapse, its gnashing maw still full of the mangled victims it could no longer swallow. Exhaustion then swallowed up Sven's consciousness as he floated down the river Hornberg and into the Sol. Sven remembered nothing of this journey though, and his first memory was that of being dragged out of the river in the city of Fieldorf, capital of Solland. Sven Hammerhelm awoke. His head throbbed and pounded. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he found himself in a poorly lit jail. Suddenly, the old familiar voice spoke out in the darkness.
Finally, you're awake. You know, as you lay there, I realized I've never introduced myself to you. My name is Karak Hirn, champion of Karnath and master of beasts.
You killed my father.
Indeed, in a roundabout way. But your name should also be on my list of misdemeanors. Pray, Beardling, tell me, how did you kill my Gorgon and escape those 100 years ago?
Sven's eyes narrowed, but he did not reply.
It is fine. Do not answer. I look forward to torturing this and much more from you over the next few days. But later, not now. I have other things to deal with at this particular moment. It seems your friends have killed the Guardian in the Deep and are currently ransacking the cellars. Marco has tasked me with dealing with these interlopers should they get past Moyboil Wormuk and his guardsmen. I shall leave you to stew until my return.
And with that, Karak Hirn left the cell. Not if I get to you first, Sven muttered under his breath before pulling out a lockpick from his beard.